Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. And this is Lodge from the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry by Albert G. Mackey. Lodge. There are three definitions which in the technical language of Masonry apply to the word lodge. 1. It is a place in which Freemasons meet. In this sense, the words more generally used are lodge room, which see. 2. It is the assembly or organized body of Freemasons duly congregated for labor or for business. These two distinctions are precisely the same as those to be found in the word church, which is expressive both of the building in which a congregation meets to worship and the congregation of worshippers themselves. This second definition is what distinguishes a meeting of symbolic Masons who constitute a lodge from one of royal arch Masons, whose meeting would be called a chapter, or of cryptic Masons, whose assembly would be a council. The word appears in French as loge, German loge, Spanish logic, Portuguese loja, and Italian loggia. This is irrefragable evidence that the word was, with the institution, derived by the continent of Europe from England. The derivation of the word is, I think, plain. Regan says that it comes from the Sanskrit loga, signifying the world. There would, at first sight, seem to be a connection between this etymology and the symbolic meaning of a lodge, which represents the world. But yet it is evidently far-fetched, since we have a much simpler root immediately at hand. Mr. Hope says, speaking of the Freemasons of the Middle Ages, and Wren had previously said the same thing, that wherever they were engaged to work, they set themselves to building temporary huts for their habitation around the spot where the work was to be carried on. These huts the German Masons called Hütten, the English lodges, which is from the Anglo-Saxon logian, to dwell. Lodge, therefore, meant the dwelling place or lodging of the Masons. And this is undoubtedly the origin of the modern use of the word. To corroborate this, we find Ducange defining the medieval Latin logic or logium as a house or habitation. He refers to the Italian loggia and quotes Lambertus Ardensis as saying that logic is a place next to the house where persons were accustomed to hold pleasant conversation. Hence Lambertus thinks that it comes from the Greek logos, a discourse. Ducange asserts that there is no doubt that in the Middle Ages, logic or logium was commonly used for an apartment or dwelling connected with the main building. Thus, the smallest apartments occupied by the cardinals when meeting in conclave were called logiae, or lodges. All of which sustains the idea that the lodges of the old operative Masons were small dwellings attached, or at least contiguous, to the main edifice on which they were at work. In the old charges, the word is not generally met with. The meeting of the craft is there usually called the assembly. But there are instances of its employment in those documents. Thus, in the Lodge of Antiquity manuscript, whose date is 1686, the word occurs several times. There is also abundant documentary evidence to show that the word lodge was long before the 18th century applied to their meeting by the Freemasons of England and Scotland. Before the restoration of the Grand Lodge of England in 1717, Preston tells us that any number of brethren might assemble at any place for the performance of work and, when so assembled, were authorized to receive into the order brothers and fellows and to practice the rites of Masonry. The ancient charges were the only standard for the regulation of their conduct. The master of the lodge was elected pro tempore, and his authority terminated with the dissolution of the lodge, was permanently established at any particular place. To the General Assembly of the Craft, held once or twice a year, all the brethren indiscriminately were amenable, and to that power alone. But on the formation of Grand Lodges, this inherent right of assembling was voluntarily surrendered by the brethren and the lodges and vested in the Grand Lodge. And from this time, warrants of constitution date their existence. The mode of bringing a lodge into existence under the present system in America is as follows. 7 Master Masons, being desirous of establishing a lodge, apply by petition to the Grand Master, who will, if he thinks proper, issue his dispensation, authorizing them to congregate as Masons in a lodge, and therein to confer the 3 degrees of ancient craft Masonry. This instrument is of force during the pleasure of the Grand Master. At the next meeting of the Grand Lodge, it expires and is surrendered to the Grand Lodge, which, if there be no objection, will issue a charter, technically called a warrant of constitution, whereby the body is permanently established as a lodge and as one of the constituents of the Grand Lodge. The power of granting warrants of constitution is vested in the Grand Lodges of Scotland, Ireland, Germany, and France, as it is in America. But in England the rule is different, and there the prerogative is vested in the Grand Master. A lodge thus constituted consists in the American system of the following officers: Worshipful Master, Senior and Junior Wardens, Treasurer, Secretary, Senior and Junior Deacons, 2 Stewards, and a Tyler. Under the English Constitution, the officers are, in addition to these, a Director of Ceremonies, a Chaplain, an Inner Guard, an Organist, and an Almoner. In a lodge of the French Rite, the officers are still more numerous. They are Le Venerable or Worshipful Master, Premier and Second Surveillance or Senior and Junior Wardens, Orator, Treasurer, Secretary, Hospitaller or Collector of Alms, the Expert, combining the duties of the Senior Deacon and an Examining Committee, Master of Ceremonies, Architect, who attends to the decoration of the lodge, and superintends the financial department, Archivist or Librarian, Keeper of the Seal, Master of the Banquets or Steward and Guardian of the Temple or Tyler. The officers in a lodge of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite are a Master, 2 Wardens, Orator, Treasurer, Secretary, Almoner, Expert, Assistant Expert, Master of Ceremonies, Almoner, Steward, Tyler, and sometimes a few others as Pursuivant and Keeper of the Seals. In other rites and countries, the officers vary to a slight extent, but everywhere there are 4 officers who always are found and who may therefore be considered as indispensable, namely the Master, 2 Wardens, and Tyler. A lodge thus constituted is a lodge of Master Masons. Strictly and legally speaking, such a body as a lodge of entered apprentices or of fellow crafts is not known under the present Masonic system. No warrant is ever granted for an apprentices or fellow crafts lodge, and without a warrant a lodge cannot exist. The warrant granted is always for a Master's Lodge, and the members composing it are all Master Masons. The lodges mentioned by Wren and Hope, to which allusion has been made, and which were congregated in the Middle Ages around the edifices which the Masons were constructing, were properly Fellow Crafts Lodge, because all the members were fellow crafts, even the Master being merely a gradation of rank, not a degree of knowledge. So at the revival of Masonry in 1717, the lodges were entered apprentices' lodges, because in them nothing but the first degree was conferred, and nearly all the members were entered apprentices. But when the Grand Lodge, where only at first the fellow craft and master's degree were conferred, permitted them to be conferred in the subordinate lodges, then the degree of Master Mason was sought for by all the craft, and became the object of every Mason's ambition. From that time, the craft became Master Masons, and the first and second degrees were considered only as preliminary steps. So it has remained to this day, and all modern lodges, wherever Masonry has extended, are Masters' Lodges and nothing less. Sometimes secretaries, ignorant of these facts, will record in their minutes that the Lodge of Master Masons was closed and a Lodge of Entered Apprentices was opened. Neither written nor unwritten law sanctions any such phraseology. If the Lodge of Master Masons is closed, there is an end of the Masonic congregation. Where is the warrant under which a Lodge of Entered Apprentices is opened? And how can a lodge in which there is not probably a single apprentice, but where all the officers and all the members are Master Masons, be called a Lodge of Apprentices? The ritual has wisely provided for the avoidance of such an anomaly, and seeing that the warrant says that the Lodge of Master Masons is empowered to make apprentices and fellow crafts, it says the lodge was opened on the first degree. That is to say, the Lodge of Masters still retaining its character as a Master's Lodge, without which it would lose its legality, and not venturing to open a kind of lodge for which its members had no warrant nor authority, simply placed itself on the points of a degree in which it was about to give instruction. Some of the rituals speak, it is true, of lodges composed in ancient times of masters and fellow crafts, or masters and apprentices. And the web lectures tell us that at the Temple of Solomon, the lodges of entered apprentices consisted of 1 master and 6 apprentices, and the lodges of fellow crafts of 2 masters and 3 fellow crafts. But all this is purely symbolic and has no real existence in the practical working of the order. No one in these days has seen a lodge of one master mason and 6 apprentices. The masons working in the first degree are as much master masons as the same masons are when they are working in the third. The lodge legally is the same, though it may vary the subjects of its instruction so as to have them in the first, second, or third degree. So important a feature in Masonry as a lodge, the congregations of Masons for work or worship, cannot be without its appropriate symbolism. Hence, a lodge, when duly opened, becomes a symbol of the world. Its covering is like the world's, a sky or clouded canopy, to reach which, as the abode of those who do the will of the great architect, it is furnished with the theological ladder, which reaches from earth to heaven. And it is illuminated, as is the world, by the refulgent rays of the sun, symbolically represented in his rising in the east, his meridian height in the south, and his setting in the west. And lastly, its very form, a long quadrangle or oblong square, is in reference to the early tradition that such was the shape of the inhabited world. 3. The lodge, technically speaking, is a piece of furniture made in imitation of the Ark of the Covenant, which was constructed by Bezaleel, Exodus 37:1, according to the form prescribed by God himself, and which after the erection of the temple was kept in the Holy of Holies. As that contained the table of the laws, the lodge contains the Book of Constitutions and the warrant of constitution granted by the Grand Lodge. It is used only in certain ceremonies, such as the constitution and consecration of new lodges, but its use is obsolete in England. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much,